Thank you, Alex. And thanks everyone for coming to listen to my presentation. Hopefully it'll be interesting and enlightening. I'll start off here with a picture of two relatively happy looking people. We have Jane, she's meeting with her physician, and they're both kind of happy because in this scenario they're talking about a new medication that could potentially help Jane out with her medical condition. Unbeknownst to them, but they're going to find out real quick that what they need to do here is get prior authorization for that medication. So for the people in the room who don't know what prior authorization is, that's a form that's set up by the insurance companies. It's typically about 4 to 6 pages long. And on that form there'll be information like patient demographics, prescriber demographics, clinical information, and financial information about the patient.
Yeah, I don't think your mic is working, so
Okay.
just, hello?
And so finding with the financial information as the last piece of the general types of stuff that's on this form. And this form needs to be signed by the prescriber, the plan holder, so that's the person who usually works at the place where they got their drug plan, and maybe the plan holder's spouse, and perhaps the patient in some scenarios. And when the insurer gets this form, they look at it and they determine if it's appropriate to fund the medication for that patient or not. So what medications typically require prior authorization? So there's expensive medications. So typically if it's more than $1,000 a month, and there's a ton of these out there today, you'll require prior authorization. And it might upset someone because I'll say lifestyle medications. Some things like for obesity and erectile dysfunction, medications with abuse or diversion potential, and then finally medications with very large markets that have relatively high price points. So something like Repatha and Praluent for high cholesterol. It's only about $700 a month, which in the pharmaceutical industry isn't shocking by any means, but there's literally millions of people in Canada who could benefit from that medication. And similarly with Ozempic, a medication for type 2 diabetes. So what's the problem? It's just a form, not so bad, right? But prescribers don't always know when the form is required and which form to use. So, and that's because each insurer has their own form. They change the forms from time to time. And at the end of the day, even within an insurance group, some patients who have an insurer require a form, and some patients don't. And that's simply because even within a single company, there's different drug plans. So the CEO of the company might have the best drug plan, let's say, and they won't require prior authorization, and the entry-level positions will. So at the point of care, when the physician is looking at the patient and making this decision, they don't know if this piece of paper is required. In addition, prior authorizations often require information that the prescriber simply just doesn't know at the time they prescribe the drug. So for example, spousal benefits. So does your spouse have a drug plan? And maybe if the patient's there, they know, but do they have the card handy? Do they know what type of plan they have? Do they know, will it cover the drug, yes or no? Probably not. So even if you were lucky enough to have this prior authorization form in front of you magically, you probably couldn't answer that question at that point in time. The next thing is for provincial benefits. Similarly, you don't know if sometimes the patient's not even aware that they have available provincial benefits. And if there is provincial benefits, sometimes you have to apply for those benefits. And that process can take months or weeks. Sorry, weeks or months. Assistance programs. So a lot of times the insurance companies want to know if you're receiving assistance from the pharmaceutical companies. And if you think about it, when you're just prescribed the drug, probably you're not enrolled in that assistance program. You don't know yet how much that drug is going to cost you. So when they ask you questions about the assistance program, you'll definitely not be able to answer them. For some drugs that are infused or injected in special ways, the forms will ask you where the drug is going to be administered. And of course, again, you don't actually know where you're going to have that drug administered. You don't even know if you're going to be able to get that drug. So that comes after. And then finally, drug history. And it makes sense that your physician would know your drug history, but in the world of specialty medications, a lot of times you're getting referred to a physician who maybe saw you once or twice and doesn't really know your full medical history. They may know you failed at certain medications or some medications didn't work well for you, but they don't know the times and the dates and the doses and so forth. And on these forms, they're looking for very specific information. And if you can't provide that information, the form will get refused. So all of this kind of accumulates to say that even if you had the form, it's not likely that that form is going to get filled completely at the point of care. Finally, there's signatures. And because most likely you won't have the form, it's going to be hard to get everyone's signature. And like we said before, the prescriber signature is pretty easy. It's their office. But getting the patient or the patient's spouse's signature might be a little bit of a challenge downstream when it comes time to that you have all the information on the form and it's ready to sign. So that sounds pretty bad, but there's more. There's actually a lot more paperwork that goes along with specialty medications. So in the insurer application process, one of the things that insurers like to do is they always like to position themselves as the secondary insurer. Whoever your other insurer is, they're first. And so a lot of times when you're filling out these forms, they're going to ask about that other insurer. And they're going to make sure that that other insurer will not pay for the drugs. You actually need to get a letter of rejection from your insurance company. And so how do you get that? Well, you fill out more forms. Finally, or not finally, I guess second last is the assistance program application. So when a drug is actually covered, or in some cases, pharmaceutical companies will give you drug before you know you're actually covered, there's an assistance program to help with payments and so forth. And to enroll into those assistance programs, well then basically you have to fill out another form. And then finally, at the end of it all, you got your assistance, you got your drug, you're ready to go. In some cases, the insurance company will make you go to a specialty pharmacy. And in that pharmacy, maybe there's some referral paperwork, or maybe there's a prescription that needs to go there, but again, another form. And so, how do all these forms get around? Well, they get around with this little machine here that we call a fax machine. And at Tech Toronto, wouldn't expect to be talking about this, but we are talking about the fax machine. So, I owned a company in 2017 that we sold, and we were the fourth largest player in the patient support program industry. And we had about 5% of the market. And my company that year sent 220,000 faxes. And so if you just gross that up, that's 4.4 million faxes that are going out to support this process for Canadians a year, which seems pretty crazy. And because this process is relatively difficult and challenging and time-consuming, and because physicians aren't experts in getting things signed and shuttled around. They're experts in preventing, treating, and diagnosing diseases. A lot of times, all of those processes don't happen properly. And so what happens? Patient shows up at pharmacy, the drug isn't covered, and if a drug isn't covered, today the rates are 85% of patients will not receive that medication within 6 to 9 months of that original prescription. And we call that prescription abandonment. In a better case, where the drug is actually covered, but no one really figured out how much financial assistance the patient needs, we see that there's still even abandonment here. If a copay is greater than $250 for a single prescription, 70% of patients will not take that prescription. And so this is like a terrible situation for patients because they don't get the medication they need. It's a terrible situation for prescribers because they can't help the patients get what they need. And of course, it's a terrible situation for pharma because they can't sell the patients what they need. So what are we doing about it? Well, my company, Leven, is working on 2 novel technologies here in Canada. The first one is real-time prescription benefit assessment. So we use information that we got from insurance companies. We have our own internal AI engine. And we have crowdsourcing on the coverage and cost of medications. And so what we can do at the point of care is give information that empowers patients and prescribers with the information of, is this medication going to be covered under my drug plans or the drug plans that I have access to? And if it is covered, how much is it going to cost? Because if it's going to cost me $5,000 even after my insurance pays their portion, well, that's one issue. But if it's totally covered, that's another. In addition to that, because the prior authorization process and all of those forms are central in getting specialty medications to patients, we have an electronic prior authorization and enrollment form solution. And what this does, it's a system that connects all of the stakeholders. And today we talked primarily about the patients and the prescribers, but in this ecosystem, there's a whole bunch of other stakeholders, access navigators, pharmacists, the patient programs or the assistance programs themselves, and of course payers, to streamline the data and signature collection in a secure environment. And at this point, prior authorizations can be started at the point of care by healthcare professionals and then passed on to other stakeholders as it's required for data collection and signatures. And all of this can be done without the use of the fax machine. And that's it. Thank you very much.
So any questions? Yep. Shout out. Oh, sorry.
How long has your company been around?
We started in November of last year, so it's a relatively young company. And the problem is, I mean, for people who are in this industry and the way that this business has been done, it's just been done such a different way for such a long time. And so for the bigger firms to change the way they do it would be quite a challenge. But we started with an empty palette, so we knew exactly what the future should look like and started from there.
How do you make money?
Well, that's why I'm here trying to figure that out, so the financial model, so first off, I've been in this industry for a long time, so this is somewhat of a pet project for me, because I wanted to make sure that it was going to work, or I wanted to see something work. But right now, we're targeting that pharma and insurance companies would be the ultimate payers of this technology. Exactly. Yep. And so we're looking to take like a piece of each of the transactions.
Do you have any pharmas that support this, in particular those that abandon the drugs to be filled?
So we're a brand new company. Our first set of clients we're just working with now, we're going to probably launch at the end of September. So that's where we're at now. So the idea here, characterizing, capturing prescription abandonment in the normal scenario is pretty challenging because there's really no good source of information other than the physician's EMR. And there's a lot of reasons why prescriptions don't actually get filled. In the data that I showed you here today, those are people who showed up at the pharmacy and then didn't get a prescription, which you can characterize by looking at pharmacy data. But true prescription abandonment is probably a bigger problem than this because some of those prescriptions just don't show up at the pharmacy and some just stay in the EMR.
I had an experience at Shoppers Drug Mart. I was in line waiting for my prescription, and there was someone in front of me, and they literally said, "What do you mean $1,000?" And they just walked out. And then I said to the pharmacist, I mean, what a horrible story. And it was just one of those things where, yes, and the pharmacist was trying to explain the cumbersome process of what you need to do to get approval. But it is quite again, I go back to one of the themes here is, it's a legacy system.
Right, and today, there's really no avenue for that pharmacist to do anything. They would basically call the physician and say, hey, either change the medication or fill out that form. And part of what we're trying to do is to give power to all the healthcare professionals involved. And so that pharmacist at that point of care would be able to start that form.
Well, I think you and Nova should talk because I know that they've got some opportunities there as well. So that's a great connection to make following. All right, well, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. So now,